Hey everyone. Today we will be creating a door that shuts when there are enemies in the room and opens when there aren't. The required image can be found in the description. Thanks to GameCrazy for the door sprites. So place it into the tiles folder and we can start. So the first thing we have to do is, we have to update our camera script. So we could detect how many enemies are in the current room and open and close the doors depending on the number. So create a new constant called screen size and set it to vector 2 160 and by 128. This is just our screen's resolution, 160 by 144 minus the thickness of our HUD, 16. I explained some of this in the original camera tutorial. And then we're going to have HUD thickness, set that to 16. And then a variable called grid pause, which is equal to vector 2 0 0. So our rooms are separated into little 160 by 128 chunks. So this variable is going to hold the camera's current chunk or the screen that the player is currently on. So this would be chunk 0 0. This would be chunk 0 -1. So we'll keep track of this in the script. The doors, we're going to compare the doors chunk to the camera's chunk and see if we need to open or close the doors. So now we need a new function called getGridPause with an argument of pause. This is going to look somewhat similar to our current process function, and we're going to update it to use this in a second. But we're going to have variable x, and it's going to be floor position x divided by screen size.x. So we're not going to use a number here. We're going to divide by screen size x and pull it from that constant. And we're not going to multiply it by 160 or by the screen size again. So same for y. And then we will return vector 2 x, y. So this is going to take our screen size, separate it into that chunk. So if we're at x of 40 and a y of -10, that'll return 0 -1. I hope I explained this correctly in the original camera tutorials. It's the same thing as that, except we're going to move this into this function because we're also going to use this function in other nodes that will just pull it from the script. And also, as you saw up here, we subtract vector 2 0 16 to account for the HUD size because we don't want to include that in the room. Here we're just going to do position y minus equals HUD thickness. So we're just going to account for that right away in this script, or in this function. And then, yeah, so now to change this into that, we're going to create a variable called player grid pause equals get grid pause, get node. We're going to go up in the scene tree and get the player, which should be on the same level in the scene tree as the camera, and take his global position. Now we're gonna set the camera's global position to the player's grid position times the screen size, so the same thing as it used to be. But you can multiply vector 2, so this will multiply the x by screen size x and then y by screen size y. And then we are also going to make use of that new variable here and set the camera's grid position to the player's grid position. So we could call from another script and ask the camera where its grid position based off of that. Cool. So now we need a... Oh, I forgot to add this to my script. Let me pause for a second. Okay. So next we are going to create a function called getEnemies. This is gonna, like I said, it's gonna check how many enemies are on the screen, but then it's gonna return exactly how many, so that we'll be able to call getEnemies, and then that'll equal a number. So first there will be an array called enemies, and then for body in area get overlapping bodies. So this itself is an array of all of the bodies, so kinematic bodies, static bodies, blah blah blah, that are currently on screen. The camera's area 2D right here. If the body type, and we have to use get so it doesn't crash if it doesn't have that that variable. So if the type is enemy and enemies find body equals -1, so if the body is an enemy and the enemy is not already inside the array, we will add it to the array. Append body. And then after the for loop, return enemies.size. So this will let us do something like, if, I'm going to assume this is in a different script, if camera.getEnemies equals 2. So if there are 2 enemies on screen, well, we're going to use that in the door script. So cool, that's all we need for the camera. Now we need a new scene. This is going to be the door itself. The root is going to be a static body 2D called enemy door. Underneath we need an animation player, which we will name anim. A sprite, and the texture is going to be our enemy door. Here it is. That we downloaded earlier, and then 2 H-frames. Then our next node is a collision shape 2D with a rectangle shape, and the extents are 8, 8. An area 2D called area, and that's gonna have another collision shape with extents of 8, 8 again. We'll hide that. Cool. So the animation player is just going to control opening and closing the door. This collision shape, it's going to be enabled when the door is closed, so the player can collide with it, and disabled when the door is open, so the player cannot collide with it. And this area, we're going to use it to check if the player is overlapping it while the door is supposed to close, and prevent it from shutting and trapping the player inside the tile. I'll say that again once we do in the script. But now we have to make our animations. So create a new one called close. The step is going to be 0.5, and our speed is going to be 8. We're going to have the sprite invisible at 0. So visibility off key, and then visible at 0.5, which will show the door, but then we also need to set the correct frame. So while the door is opening, it'll first have this frame of 1, and then it'll go back to 0. Oh no, while it's closing, I mean. Okay, yeah, that was right. So while it's closing, it'll look like this. It'll start invisible, become visible, and then switch those frames. And then at 0.5, we want to set its collision shape disabled Boolean to false. So basically we're going to make sure when this animation starts, the collision shape is enabled. So the player can collide with it here. Calling it disabled is a tiny bit confusing while talking about this, but whatever. Now we need a new animation. Don't duplicate that, sorry. New animation called open. This is, once again, going to have a step of 0.5. So at frame 0, the sprite will be visible. And at 1, it'll be invisible. 0 will have a frame of 0. And then 0.5 will have a frame of 1. And then we want to set disabled on the collision shape 2D to true at 0.5. So there's opening. And at this point, the player will be able to walk through it. Cool, that's it for the scene. So save it into the tiles folder as enemy door. And now we can create its script. So we need 2 onReady variables. We're just going to use this as a to call these nodes just by writing camera for the camera. This is also going to assume that the doors are placed on the same scene tree position. If we need to change that in a future video, we can, but like if we're gonna add these to a tile map or something so we could place them more easily. But for now, we're just gonna place them underneath the node on the same level as the player and camera. So that's that. And our ready is just gonna play the open. So make sure all the doors are open when the game first starts. Now we need a process function. The first thing we need to do is see if the door is in the current room. So if camera grid pause is equal to camera get grid pause global position, it's gonna call that script from our camera node and set the argument to the enemy door's position. So this is gonna that's just gonna call it, see if this position is the same as this variable. And if it is, we're then gonna check, we're gonna ask the camera if there are 0 enemies in the room without other function we just wrote. And then if our assigned animation, assigned works the same as current, but current also makes sure that the animation is playing. Assigned is just if the animation is playing or if this was the last animation that played. So if it's not already open, play open. So now if there are 1 or more enemies and the player is not overlapping our area, so so else, so it's more than 0, and area dot get overlapping bodies has player, except it's going to be not, or I usually do exclamation point. So if the player is not on the area, and under here, if assign animation is not close, then play close. So this whole bit will make sure the doors are open if there are no enemies, and this will close it if there are enemies and the player is not already on top of the door, which would trap it if it is. So cool. And then under this statement, we are going to have else and it'll be this. So just copy that. That'll mean if the current screen is not the one with the door, the doors will always just be open. That makes sure we could walk into the room again if our dungeon happened to have maybe a bend that allows you to enter a room that should have been locked off by a closed enemy door. Good dungeon design shouldn't allow that, but it's still there so we don't walk up to an entrance with an invisible wall on the other side. So yeah, that's that. Now let's put some in the game. I'm going to set this layer to -1 for a second so we don't have to see it as I'm putting it here. Enemy door. Oops, I put that on top of the HUD. Enemy door. Let's first run the close animation so we could see more clearly. And we're gonna put it up here and flip it, the rotation to 180 so it'll face the other side. It's purely for aesthetics. And when it's rotated, I didn't have it on anyway, but once it's rotated, pixel snap stops working, so you have to round out these numbers yourself. So just place it as close as possible and then go in and clean it up. So there's that. If we save the game and run, these doors, oh, let's turn on the HUD too. The doors should close as soon as the player walks past them. Okay, the one on the right should close right away because I'm not overlapping it, but the one on the left should close once I'm out of it. See? And now if we kill all the enemies, oh, I probably should have put fewer enemies. Yeah, let me do that. Let's just put 1. So now if player walks in here and kills it, it opens. And you can walk through it just fine. So yeah. That's it for this video. There's gonna be a tiny break from the Zelda-like series in order to start putting up the level editor series that was funded on Patreon last month. It's only gonna be a few episodes, and it's just gonna explain how to save and load levels into an editor and run them. And we're gonna be making the editor, and it's gonna work similarly to the tile maps, but it'll be in-game. And we're also gonna include this auto tile stuff inside of the level editor. So just a few basic tiles that you could place down in-game and then save and load them. It's gonna start, the series is gonna start with a short platformer controller tutorial. I think it's just gonna be called platformer tutorial and not level editor part 1 platformer controller. Just in case people want to see that and don't care about the level editor, it'll show up more easily. Thank you to Jonathan Cobb for pledging $10 on Patreon. And speaking of Patreon, the first 2 written tutorials have been done for the last little while now, and I'm gonna be catching up to the latest videos. I haven't been able to do that because my laptop's been broken, and I would usually just write those when I'm on the bus and not busy. But it's broken. So I'll write them on my desktop. It's just when I'm on my desktop, I'm usually working on something either for my game or for the next video. So sorry about that. I'll catch up. Let me know if when it is caught up, you would rather watch the videos or read the text tutorials. I'm not gonna stop either of them. I just want to know right now if there is still interest in the written tutorials. Obviously, if you're on episode 13 of the videos, you're fine with the videos, but just let me know if it's something that you might switch to. Check out my website if you want to see what they look like, because they're quite nice, I think, and it's a lot easier to go through at your own pace, and you don't have to listen to me the whole time. But yeah, thank you for watching, and see you soon.